All right, hey everybody, and welcome to the stream. Hope everyone is having a fantastic week so far. And today we are going to discuss Lottie Animations. But prior to that, I have a bit of a presentation, like I usually do, about images, a little bit of information about handoff. Toward the end, I will talk a little bit about the history of Lottie Animations, and then at the very end, I will use Adobe After Effects to create a super simple Lottie animation to show you, or to give an idea about how that could be accomplished. And so let's jump right into this. So to begin with, as stated, we'll talk a little bit about images, a little bit about graphics, the differences. There's two types of graphics, when to use each, and sort of the pros and cons of each one of those. And so to begin with, we're gonna talk about SVG. And SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And SVG, those are easy to spot in the wild. Your file extension on SVG is .svg, and so it's pretty easy to find one of those. And SVG images, or graphics, are based on math. They're based on mathematical formulas, and because of that, they have infinite scalability. And what I mean by scalability is you could take an image a vector image that you created in any number of applications, and using the resize function, you can make it, let's say that it started out at, you made an image that's 100 pixels by 100 pixels. For example, this image right here, this graphic that I made in Figma, this yellow circle, or yellow ellipse, I should say, with the 4 pixel green stroke. So that's 100 by 100. If I wanted to enlarge this SVG, this graphic here, if I wanted to make it 1,000,000 pixels by 1,000,000 pixels, that could be easily done. The math is computed automatically, so to speak. And in making it that much larger, it would lose no fidelity. It would look just as crisp as it does here. And also, of course, if I scaled it down in size, let's say 100 by 100 pixels to 10 by 10, it would look exactly the same. Wouldn't look exactly the same. It would have just the same fidelity. It would look as sharp, as crisp. And so that is one of the defining characteristics of an SVG, of a vector image. And as we can see here, this is a screenshot I took from CodePen of what this image looks like if you were to try to render this in a browser. For example, if you copied this code right here, or sorry, if you copied this markup right here, place this in an HTML document, when you loaded that document in a browser, the browser would show this image right here. And so we have opening tag, SVG, we have a declaration of the height, the width, and we have the X and Y, we have the radii. And so if we altered one of these, the CX or the CY, we would have more of an oval shape. And let's see here, we also have a color for the stroke, and we have the stroke color, which is green, and we have fill color, which is yellow. And when I was making this, I did the markup first, and then I recreated what this would be in Figma. And what I found out, and I did not know this, is in Figma, instead of a hex value, it recognizes some colors based on their names. And so for the fill value, I typed in YELLOW. I typed in yellow, hit enter, and it accepted that. It turned it into a hex value, but it accepted that. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Same thing with the green stroke. I just typed in green into the stroke section in the right sidebar. And let's see here. Boo, I was hoping to get full screen. Anyway, there we go. And so there are many vector design tools out there that, as a designer, you may be familiar with. Some of the more popular ones are Figma, Illustrator, Sketch, and Adobe XD. There are other tools out there that aren't necessarily vector design tools, such as Photoshop, for example. It's more of an image editing software. However, it definitely has the pen tool, and if any design application where you find the pen tool, you're working with vectors at some point. And so, and if you recall my pen tool, not lecture, my pen tool presentation from last Saturday's stream, you'll recall that essentially everything in Figma and by association Sketch, XD, and I guess Illustrator for that matter, almost everything revolves around vectors. The only time that you'll end up using any sort of bitmapped or raster image in Figma is when you place an image found on the hard drive, when you place a bitmap image. And so that would be like a JPEG, PNG, GIF, .bmp, anything like that. And so don't want to get ahead of myself. And so again, vectors are based on math, which not only allows them to have a sort of infinite scalability without losing any graphical fidelity, but it also impacts their file size. SVGs are incredibly small file size wise because there is no two-dimensional table of pixels for in the file size, or in the file itself is not made up of indications of pixels and their color, and so much smaller file size. Moving on. Next we have bitmap or raster images, or raster images, depending on how you wish to pronounce that. So bitmap images are pixels on a grid. They are pixels in a two-dimensional, they're almost always square pixels on a two-dimensional plane. And these are, anytime you see, well, that's not always true, the photos that you take with your smartphone or a camera like the one I'm speaking into, or maybe a webcam or anything like that, those images are usually out of the box saved as JPEG images. And JPEG images are raster images, they're bitmap images. And they are appropriate for, again, photographs, for things like products is one of the first things that comes to mind. When you go shopping online, you're going to see bitmap images of the product that you're going to purchase. And the reason for that will become clear momentarily. And so the difference here, and this is a good image I found online, I don't remember, just Google image search. And so on this zoom in of the exact sort of similar representation of an image, if we zoom in on this raster, the software that whoever created this image was using places a grid down so you can see each individual cell that a pixel lives in, if you want to think of it that way. And as we can see here, we have all these blue pixels living in the cells here, and then we have sort of an area where there's very light blue, very light yellow, and then we have yellow, sort of maybe darkish yellow, living in the cells over here. And in the vector image, when we zoom in, we can't really see the individual cells. I mean, certainly they're there. Everything that we see is essentially pixels. However, again, these angles are just mathematical formulas. It's all Bezier. It's Bezier curves all the way down, almost. And so you'll get infinite, again, scalability when you're dealing with vector images as opposed to raster images. And so let's see here. So why don't we... I skipped something. Anyway, why don't we? A question here is, why don't we use vector images for everything? If I'm talking them up so much, why don't we see them all over the place? Well, the issue is vector images are really they're really more appropriate for your more simple designs, and I put simple or simpler in this case in quotation marks on purpose. And so, what you're going to see, types of images or types of graphics that you're going to see that are made from vectors include icons, line art, or maybe technical drawings could definitely be candidates for being made as vectors. And a lot of the animations that you see, not all, but many of the animations that you see online are vector-based, if they're not, like a cartoon that was produced by a studio. Sometimes those are based on vectors, however, not always the case. Certainly that's more the case these days as the software has gotten a lot better. However, even 20 years ago, that wasn't really that much of a thing. And as I'm skipping around a bit here, as I spoke earlier, there's a smaller file size associated with vector images compared to the same image at the same dimension, or at a dimension with your bitmap images. It's going to be a smaller file format. And inexpensive, and bear in mind, always when I'm describing things like this, bear in mind that one of the UX mantras is it depends. So these aren't always true 100% of the time in every single context, but generally speaking, these things are true. So you have a smaller file size, and one of the benefits of working with vector graphics is if you need a graphic for something, your in-house team, if you have someone on the design team who works in Illustrator or Figma or what have you, they might be, if they're proficient at their craft, they will be able to create a vector image, some vector art for you, a vector graphic, pretty quick. And it will be useful for any number of resolutions that you might engage with in your product or in your project. And going along with that, it can be relatively inexpensive. Again, it all depends to create art compared to using a camera or having a dedicated phone on the team to get images that way. And the reason for that is, of course, if you don't already have the gear, you would have to go buy the gear. If it were a camera, you might need to buy lenses, lighting equipment I have it all around me, but you can't see it. And with vector design applications, well, all you need is a computer, and you probably already have a whole host of computers of various types in your design team. And all you need from that point is the appropriate software. And of course, there's paid and there's free. And so Illustrator, you'll need to acquire a Creative Cloud monthly subscription or yearly, however that works out for you. And depending on context, depending on individual, depending on team, that can get expensive. And so that's not appropriate for everybody. On the other hand, Figma has a great free tier, a great free platform that you can design on. And if you're a student or you're in an education track, then you can go the educational tier route, which unlocks even more features for you. And so, on no tier in Figma are any tools unavailable to you. It's just how many teams are able to create, and so on and so forth. And so, aside from that, there's Sketch and GIMP, and you can even do, GIMP's free. GIMP's open source. And so you can create vector images, save them as SVGs in any number of software for relatively inexpensive or free. And so there is a very low barrier to entry as far as designing for SVGs goes. On the other hand, as I said earlier, SVGs they're not appropriate in all scenarios. As you can see up here, they're most appropriate for icons, line art, some types of animations. And to bring up the product example again, if you were looking for a new camera and you wanted to see what B&H or Best Buy had, you would go to their websites, and if you saw illustrations, if you saw SVGs or anything other than an actual photograph of the product, that would not suffice. If you're going to spend money, you don't want a representation of what you're going to purchase. You want an actual photo. And so when you open it up, when you purchase it and open it up at home or at work, you don't get surprised by what's in the box. And so it's not ideal in every scenario. It has some very well-established use cases, but not every one of them. And then lastly, and what ends up being a huge headache for the dev team is browsers, which, let's see here. Yeah, so this bit of markup right here, this bit of code can be dropped right into an HTML document, and web browsers have no problem rendering that. They'll render that almost instantaneously. However, when it comes to displaying vector graphics.svgs, it can be a huge headache for iPhone and Android devs, and especially those who work on both. It's not well. I suppose if you ask if you were to ask Google/Alphabet or Apple if it were well implemented, they would say yes. However, it's drastically different for each one of them. And I'm going to exit from the presentation right quick just to give you a quick indication of what that looks like. And so, oh, perfect, I'm here. And so I'm going to select this ellipse here from the very beginning, from the first slide. And if we go over to the Inspect panel here in the right sidebar, Let's change that to iOS. And unfortunately, I cannot zoom in on this area here. But if we, oh, that's not very helpful. Let's see here. Yeah. So this is the code that it would take on iOS to display this SVG as we see it here. And this is significantly longer than this bit of markup, this bit of code that we see right here. And we can also see, so yeah, it says iOS, here's the code for iOS. And we can go ahead and, with the same layer selected, change it to Android. And we can see that it's twice as long. There's almost twice as many lines at any rate. And it's this is just if I were trying to develop for both systems or both operating systems simultaneously, I imagine this would be a huge headache until I got used to it. And even then, that's got to be just super annoying, not being able to just include a .svg file and point to it. And so let's go back here. Maximize. There we go. And so one of the downsides of SVG is, again, iPhone and Android handle SVGs differently. Web browsers don't really have that big of a problem with it. However, if you are developing a product for mobile, which I imagine many UX developers these days are, might run into an issue. And there's a wealth of images to choose from to show that there's a reason I put simpler in quotation marks. Vector art. Vector illustration has been a thing for quite a long while now, and this is an image. Oop, can't zoom in. That's unfortunate. So this is an image from Sebastian Ferrat that I found earlier to give an illustration. Haha, that not all vector art is simple. However, this might not necessarily be made for an app. This would be more just art to put on a portfolio. So again, different use cases, but do not fall into the mindset that thinking SVG is only for simple art, because there is some astonishing, very lifelike vector art out there that can almost be indistinguishable from a photograph. However, the amount of effort that goes into creating these images is just staggering. You can work for months to come up with an image that you could just as easily shoot with a phone. And of course, that's no disrespect to the people who make these images. It's fascinating, and I would love to be able to do that. However, for the sake of product design and working on projects, it's not feasible. And so, moving on here, and yes, so as hinted to earlier, the issue with SVGs is all about the handoff. That's where things can get messy. And so, as I demonstrated in Figma with the yellow circle with the green stroke, it can become very tiresome. Let's say tiresome, annoying for the developer who is developing for iOS, Android, and maybe even the web at the same time. Web being probably the easiest implementation of vector graphics. However, you saw the staggering difference between what you would need to include on an iOS app compared to an Android app for just that relatively simple yellow ellipse with a green stroke. And so I found this image of a dev who has 3 different monitors, and I can imagine that is very much a real life scenario for devs who are working on pushing apps for multiple different system architectures. And so SVG definitely has a bunch of great things going for it. However, it does fall short a little bit, and it's not SVG's problem. It was implementation on the part of the iOS architects and the Android architects. So SVG is not to blame for this necessarily. So SVG has a bunch of wonderful things associated with it. However, it can be a nightmare for the devs, and that was very much on the mind of the initial Lottie creators. And let's hear it. So yeah, Lottie is all about cross-platform animations. And imagine, if you will, a single format for all devices. So instead of your dev needing to memorize a complex set of rules for integrating an SVG onto each different hardware software platform, instead of that, if there were just one, just one file, one deliverable for each, that would drastically reduce the amount of work on the dev team's part and possibly the UX designer's part as well, depending on how much work they have to do after the fact, or make different versions of deliverables work for iOS and Android. And so that's where Lottie comes in, and this being the Lottie logo right here. And Lottie, the creators of Lottie sought to create just a single format, and I use that loosely, a single method of getting the same animation on all platforms. And so just briefly, and I will not go into this at length. It's fascinating, but far outside the scope of what we're doing in this stream. So Lottie files are JSON files created in a variety of apps, and JSON is JavaScript object notation, and it's a human readable text format used for like storing and retrieving data and just sending it all over the place. And it's highly semantic as well. And so I am sure that any UX professional out there, when I said JavaScript, sort of the hair rose up on the back of their necks there. So even though Lottie is sort of the information in a Lottie file is stored in JSON format, that doesn't mean like there is no coding on your part. Certainly, if you wanted to, you could get into the file and edit lines of JSON code if you really felt like doing so. However, the work of the UX developer in developing Lottie files is going to be done in software that's similar to Figma. And so you don't have to worry about cranking out lines of code or anything like that. And so Lottie files, the file extension for JSON it's JSON or JSON, however you choose to pronounce that. The file extension is .json, or a newer file extension that I think was developed two years ago, 2.5, something like that, is .lottie, which is just called .lottie. And so yeah, JSON came first, but it appears Lottie is becoming more common, and there are a few reasons for that. I haven't been able to do a ton of research because some of it gets well above my education level pretty quick, but it appears that .lottie files save even more file size than .json, which is already a tremendous file saver for a lot of animations. However, I think another reason that the team gave for creating the .lottie file was to make it more. So .json files can be any number of things, and they're sort of language independent, and so if a dev is faced, if they're looking at a directory and it's just full of JSON files, it might be difficult just on glance to immediately know what are your animation files and what are your non-animation files. And one of the reasons that .lottie was created was to at least have a visual indicator, just a quick glance of, instead of having animation.json, be animation.lottie. And so it would be easier to separate the two, to have a visual distinction between the two file types. And I believe another reason was better branding, and that's certainly fine, and I could see why they would want to go with that. And while I understand a little bit of the sort of .lottie, not file architecture, I have an idea of how it works. Again, far outside the sort of purview of my discussion this evening. And so to get off of JSON, we will, so Lottie was created in 2015, and the libraries were developed for it in 2017 by individuals from Airbnb, Android, and iOS. And I think it's just, I was trying to read about the history. I don't want to turn this into a history lesson, of course, but I was reading a bit about the history of Lottie development. And it looks like, I think one guy in 2015 made a plugin for After Effects called Body Movin'. And from that, it was some development picked up by one person from Airbnb, like one person from Android, and one person who worked at Airbnb, an Android dev and an iOS dev, and like 3 people got together and sort of codified it and developed other libraries for it. And in 2020, so 2 years ago, the .lottie file format was created. And I wanted to very, very briefly focus on this gentleman here, Salih Abdul Karim was the guy in. So I don't want to give him more credit than is due, but he is very much responsible. I'm sure if it wasn't him, it would be somebody else, but he's very much responsible for putting the idea of Lottie, or pushing the use case for Lottie, for a lot of developers, a lot of UX professionals. And let's see here. I want to go ahead and that should be a hyperlink. Hey, you don't have to show me that anymore. And so there's a quick, like 56-second video about Sully, and he gives a sort of very brief introduction about how Lottie came to be, or at least his help in the development thereof. So let's see here. Ooh, there we go. And hopefully the audio will pick up. If not, you can check out lottiefiles.com, and they have a courses section where you can, it's probably under Learn. Yeah. Learn Education Center, where you can watch more videos to get a deeper understanding of how Lottie works. But let's see what we have here.
Hi, my name is Salih, and welcome to a guided course on Lottie Files. As part of the small team that created Lottie, I'm here to share some of my knowledge, tips, and tricks in creating animations, as well as the ins and outs of using Lottie Files to test, share, and collaborate. I joined Airbnb as the only motion designer. I was making all these animations that couldn't get implemented because we didn't have a good solution. We were using PNG sequences, remakes, just to put a single little animation into our app. It was just a whole long, confusing process. The big problem we were solving was that there was no way at all to implement animations except crappy formats. We created Lottie, and here we are. Hi, I'm Salih. I'm a motion designer at Airbnb, and I'm going to show you how to use Lottie. Welcome to the class.
Excuse me. Yeah. So Salih there was instrumental. That's the word I was looking for, in helping Lottie reach the big time. And interestingly, he again, motion designer over at Airbnb. And so our collective hats off to Salih. And let's see here. I will say, as before you get too excited about Lottie, and you should be the appropriate amount of excited toward Lottie at this point, do know that Figma does not currently support Lottie files directly. That is to say, you can't drop in or include a .json or .lottie file in your Figma prototype or your any project that you're working on. And I cannot speak. I don't use Sketch, and I don't use Adobe XD. I cannot speak for that software. There may be inclusion, which would be really cool. However, at this time, that is not currently possible. However, there is a plugin that allows you, that I think is made by the folks who develop Lottie. There's a plugin you can get for Figma that allows you to search the database at Lottie files, and a bunch of creators upload their Lottie files. For some are free, and some you can pay money to get some really amazing stuff there. The plugin allows you to search the database, find an animation that you like, and it will convert the Lottie file into a .gif, and you can place the .gif in your files, and those will work as intended. However, unfortunately, at this time, there's no support for .json or .lottie files, any sort of Lottie file, I suppose, in Figma. And as we can see here, I was I can. Oh, now I can zoom in. And so this is a GIF of a Lottie animation that I found using the Lottie plugin, and it looks fine for prototyping. Prototypes don't need to be perfect; they're not meant to be perfect. And even looking at the second monitor, I can see that this is not the most fluid thing in the world. And so it gets the point across just fine. However, it's not going to have the full fluidity of a Lottie file that you would find on an app or living, or in a browser. And so let's see here. Oh yeah, so on that topic, browsers do support, and so Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Brave, Opera, whatever you happen to use, Firefox, do support Lottie, and I should say they don't support it natively, or I don't believe they do, but using some scripting, you can include a Lottie player on your site and have it play the animation that you've created, or an animation that you found on Lottie files, or whatever the case may be. And so yeah, adding the animation to your, for example, portfolio is not that difficult. And I copied this from my website, and there's if you're familiar with writing markup or looking at code, this may be self-explanatory, but I'll explain a little bit as we go down here, and I won't belabor this process, I promise. And so script source, that's pointing to script src is pointing to where the Lottie player is, and it's .js, so it's the JavaScript file, and it's hosted on Unpackage, which is a CDN, a content delivery network. I'm not hosting this file on my own domain because I want to make sure that I'm always pointing to the most up-to-date version, and it's also, I think this player is, my mentor looked it up, we looked it up in the dev console, and I think it's like an incredibly small file size for this JavaScript. It's like 9 kilobytes, 9, something like that. It's this really tiny file. And so it loads fairly quickly, even on mobile devices that might not have the best internet access in the entire world. And so once the Lottie player script has been initialized, then we include the Lottie player itself. And the src source is pointing to bill.json, which is a JSON file. It's a Lottie file that I created in Adobe After Effects. And then we have some properties. Here we have the background set to transparent, speed is set to 1, default. I have and then we have some inline CSS for the style. That is to say, I'm setting the width and the height here. And then we have it set to loop. So this animation loops when it gets to the very end. So when it gets to the last frame, it loops back to the first frame and continues just looping forever. And autoplay is set so that when the Lottie player loads and the JSON file loads from the server, it just starts to play automatically. And then we terminate, or we have the end tag for Lottie player, and then below that, I have some markup wrapped in the NoScript tag, and that points to a .png. So I have a bitmap image that the first frame of the Lottie animation looks very similar to this roster image, and so for users who, for whatever reason, do not have JavaScript enabled in the browser, I have a fallback here, and so for users who do not have JavaScript enabled in their browser, a static image, just a roster image, a PNG, will show in its place, which it looks essentially, it looks virtually the same, has the same dimension to it, and I did that. So it's sort of wise to do this in general. If ever you're relying on JavaScript, you have to take into account that not everyone is going to have JavaScript enabled for whatever reason, and so you'll want a fallback. And so there aren't like big holes in your page, or there isn't vital content that's missing because the user doesn't have JavaScript enabled. And so I have both here. And so any user who comes to my website, provided they're not using a screen reader, will enjoy the content. And I say users who aren't using a screen reader, I made sure to not put any vital information at all in any of the Lottie files that I made. And so to give you an illustration of what that looks like, we can go ahead and go to, oh, that's not the link I was expecting. Let's see here. And, oh, okay, yeah, right. So it's writing the code, writing the markup is not something you have to do by yourself. You can go to lottiefiles.com/web-player. You can point it, go away. You can point it toward the, it's here. You plug in this top field where your Lottie file is. In this case, it's the .json. And then you can change some of the parameters here, background color, direction, whether or not it's moving forward or moving in reverse, play mode, which you can set to normal or bounce, the various width and height, animation speed, which is automatically set to 1x, autoplay controls the loop, some of the parameters that I had set in my own markup. And it has here, once you plug all this in, it has here, so it shows you a preview of what the animation is going to look like. And of course, you can turn off this little, you can turn off the controls right here by deselecting that, and it takes away, as you can see here in the code or in the markup, it says controls, and when you remove the check mark for controls, it removes controls. And so you can see it without the little control area there. And so it's you don't have to write the you don't have to write the markup of the code yourself. So it's pretty easy to integrate into your portfolio if you are using Squarespace or Webflow or Wix or anything like that, maybe UXfolio. If you have access to just the .htmls and you can add little snippets of your own markup or your own code, then you're able to integrate Lottie files into your portfolio super quickly. And to give you, go to my portfolio, which is still a work in progress. But as we can see here at the very top, this photo that I took a while back, I have, so this, if I can highlight it, no. There we go. So this entire square right here is the Lottie file, is the .json that is pointed to right here. So this is directly from the HTML, the index.html, which is what we're looking at right here. And so in this Lottie animation, I do have a raster image, and you can have raster images. You can have bitmaps inside of your Lottie files, no problem. But here I have 4 SVGs total that are animating in some way, and so I have these undulating blobs to the top left, and then I have some just simple rotation on these 4 pointed stars down here. And this is, of course, what it looks like with JavaScript enabled. And if we disable JavaScript, let's see here. I almost never turn it off. It's not DevTools. Let's see here. While extension download history bookmark. I don't know. Let's try settings. Of course, it's settings. And search for Java, shields and site. Let's see, JavaScript. Sites can use JavaScript. Don't allow sites to use JavaScript. Okay, and then let's do a hard refresh here. Okay, and so this is an example of what a user would see if they don't have JavaScript enabled. And so, as you can see, it's pretty much the same image. It's just this is a PNG. This is a raster image that loaded because of the no script element that I have in the HTML, and so no content is really lost. It's just the animation, and that doesn't affect the usability of the website whatsoever. And so we'll go back to settings. Sites can use JavaScript. Exit out of here. Do a hard refresh. And as we can see, the Lottie animation works as it's intended to. And this stream is definitely not meant to be a discourse on animation, how to use animation, when to use animation, what to do, what not to do, so on and so forth. But I will point out that learning Lottie and being able to use Lottie is super exciting, especially if you are used to using, for example, Figma and not having the greatest access in the world to animations. It's very, very simple. And so it would be quite easy to just be over the moon with what you can do with Lottie. But always remember that animations, a little bit goes a long way. And soon I'm going to redo this portion of the animation to be less blobby, to be less attention catching, because I don't want that to be the focus of the site. And the problem with animations, well, many problems, but one of the problems with animation is it can easily be overused. And again, a little bit goes a long way. And so this is the only area on this HTML document that there's any Lottie animation whatsoever. These are just PNGs. And there are, let's see here, four Lottie animations in total, and each one is at the very top of the screen. And as we can see here, a bit of more of a subtle Lottie animation. But each one of the case study pages has its own Lottie animation at the very top. But the last thing I want to do is bog the visitor to the website down with a bunch of visual overhead. I don't want to confuse them or detract from the actual content. This is just to I guess it's supplemental delight or a tiny bit of additional joy, although this may be a little bit overwrought here. In any event, let's see here. Okay, yeah, so The question is how to create a Lottie file. It's like, okay, all this sounds fantastic, and you've heard me make reference to Adobe After Effects. And certainly, Adobe After Effects can be used. I did also, and I think it's still, so bear in mind, Lottie began being really developed only a few years ago. And we only got the .lottie file extension 2 years ago. And that is, in web technology context, that still makes it a pretty young technology. And it hasn't reached like mass adoption yet. And the degree to which it reaches mass adoption is to be seen. I'm not sure how many websites you're going to see using this. Certainly, the bigger websites, I imagine, that use animations now will gradually start moving over to Lottie, or if they thought about using animations but just thought it was too difficult, Lottie will be definitely the way to go. At least that's what it's looking like right now. And so the more it gets used, the more mature it comes the more mature it becomes as a technology. We're going to have more tools to create with it. However, all I was able to really define right now is After Effects, which is AE, it's the logo right here, and then Animator by Haiku. And it's a bit confusing to me what the software is called, because the way this is stated, Animator by Haiku, to me implies that the software is called Animator, but when I installed it, the application is called Haiku, and so that's a bit confusing. And this is it's open source software, so it's free software, and it's available on GitHub. And for OS X users, there's a .dmg file available. So all you need to do is just open the DMG file, copy over the app to your applications folder, and just run it from there. And for Windows, you will need to run the source code. However, they have a pretty simple walkthrough about, well, simple in quotes. They have a they have a guide that's easy to understand on their GitHub for installing dependencies and all that good stuff. And so this is the Animator website. It's haikuanimator.com. And yeah, so you can go to their GitHub, and if you have not used GitHub before, it may look imposing, but I assure you that it is not. And if you scroll down, we have a screenshot here of what Animator looks like, a very large screenshot of that. And yeah, it's actually too big. We have a screenshot of what Animator looks like here, and to me, this looks like a mashup of Figma, in that it has a design or layers panel on the left sidebar, and then we have a timeline and an area where you put your keyframes down here, a la After Effects. And so I was pretty excited to get to use this, and in fact I wanted to create a Lottie animation for the sake of this presentation. However, I was unable to get Animator to authenticate with my Figma, and I tried numerous times over the course of about half an hour, and I'm going to try again later on because it looks really cool. It looks like a more streamlined version of what you would use After Effects for creating Lottie files. And so I was really looking forward to this. However, that is not something that I can demo for you right now on this stream. I look forward to being able to do that at some point in the future. However, that's not something we can currently do. But yeah, it's about a Haiku team, Animator, open source, good stuff. Can't wait to get to use it. And let's see here. And of course, Animator is free. After Effects, you need a Creative Cloud subscription, which I can't even tell you what that is right now, like $14, something like that. I'm not sure. But these two are the ones that I could quickly find for the sake of this presentation. It could be that there are other Lottie creation apps out there, and I'm certain there are. However, I'm at this point in time not aware of any. And before you jump in to if all this sounds fantastic, excuse me, and you may want to just dive in immediately, I would caution any new users who don't have any experience previously with with animation, or the understandings of the basics of animation. And so if you've ever used, if you use Adobe Premiere or After Effects before, then it's not really that big of a deal. Or if you've ever created animation in a 3D tool such as Maya or Blender, or I don't know, any of the million other three-dimensional design tools out there, then you'll probably be at least somewhat familiar with the basics of animating. And it's not terribly difficult. I don't think, in my opinion, it is not terribly difficult. But having an understanding of how frames per second works, with regard to your time sequences, and how and what keyframes are. Again, not a very complicated subject, but at the very beginning might be difficult to wrap your mind or wrap your head around. Having an understanding of what these things are in transforms as well will be useful prior to going in to creating Lottie Animations, because a lot of the foundations of Lottie Animations are the same as any other animation tool. And let's see here. Okay, yes, that is the last slide in this slide deck. And let's go ahead and close that. Is that right? Yes, it is. And with the bit of time remaining in this stream, I want to create a simple animation, or create a very simple animation in After Effects, and show how easy it is to go from After Effects to creating a Lottie file. And it's a plugin, and so it's not that difficult. And so let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and close Figma, and let's see here, and get my calendar off the screen. Let's go ahead and start Adobe After Effects. And I did a small test stream earlier, so hopefully you're running Streamlabs OBS and Adobe After Effects. Won't be too much of an issue. There we go. And so let's see here. Still thinks my name is Roger. That's cute. And so this is Adobe After Effects. We'll go to New Project, and again, I would love to do a stream about Adobe After Effects, but I've only been using it for maybe 3 weeks, and I definitely consider myself a beginner. There's so much stuff in Adobe After Effects. I only know how to do Lottie-related things, and so that's all I can really focus on. And maybe in the future I'll do an After Effects video, but that's at the current time out of the purview of that's outside the theme of what these streams are all about. And so this is after you've created a new project. We are in Adobe After Effects 2022, and especially coming from Figma, all of these panels, all these sidebars might be a little overwhelming. And if you're coming from, or if you have a Premiere background, this might look a bit dumbed down, but I can assure you all these things are easily understood once you get to know them. But from this screen, anyway, we will go ahead and choose New Composition, and this is our composition settings. If for whatever reason, or if you make a mistake with this little dialog right here, you can always bring it back on Mac keyboard. It's Command K. That'll bring this window back, and you can change any of these parameters anytime during the animation creation process. So it's nothing to worry about. And so composition name, that's just the comp name, so I'll just call that shape. Preset, I leave mine to custom, and we have a width and the height, and the width and the height. So when we're done here and I click OK, a canvas will appear in this composition panel. I'm not sure if they call it a canvas. You could think of it like a canvas, like the kind you see, or like the one you see in Figma, will appear behind this window. And the width and the height is, again, the width and the height of the canvas. And so pixel aspect ratio, square pixels, I have never found a reason to change this to anything else except for square pixels. Your frame rate is the FPS, and that's going to affect the fluidity or the smoothness of any transition that you have or any animation that you have. And it's also going to increase your file size. And so 30 is going to be your minimum. I would say probably, film FPS, like 24 point whatever, 25 is your bare minimum. I try to keep mine at about 60. However, I do need to keep it, I'm always keeping an eye on the file size. And very often when I'm making my Lottie animations, I will export it numerous times, tweaking some of these composition settings, specifically the frame rate, to make sure I get it to like a sweet spot for the file size, sweet spot being low as possible. But for now, we'll keep it at 60. Resolution, full. We're going to keep it at full. And then we have start time code and duration. And so I don't mess with the start time code. Again, I'm still a beginner at After Effects, but the duration is going to be essentially how many frames you have to work with, how long the animation is going to be before it loops, for example, if you choose to have yours loop. And so and it can get pretty long, but I have mine set to 5 seconds here. And then we have our background color, which is set to black. And this was confusing to me at the very beginning because I wanted to set mine to transparent, right? Because I was going to put it on my website. And the background color, you can't set it, it doesn't have an alpha channel, that's to say you can't set it to transparent. And what that does is it merely provides a background color for the canvas. The background itself is not a layer. It's not an element that you can select. And so when you export to a .lottie or a .json, the background is not going to appear. It's going to be transparent. The background color here we see in the composition settings is merely to assist in, it's there to help the designer see what they're doing more or less. And so if you are, for example, if you are let's say creating an animation that has a bunch of very bright colors, maybe whites or pastels or something like that. Black, as I have it here, might be an appropriate color because you would be able to have much more contrast. You'd be able to see what you're doing. And if you if you're working with those colors, you probably wouldn't want to set that to white for counter example, because those might be difficult to see. You might strain your eyes, might be difficult to see what you're doing. And so for the sake of this, we'll keep it at black. And again, Command K, you can bring up the composition settings to change this as you see fit at Command K. And so once you hit OK, this is the window that we get here. And this is our composition window, the composition panel. And it says composition at the top here, and then it has the name of the composition, which I just called shape. And over here in the left is project panel, and anything that you import, any assets that you import, I'm sure there's a good reason for this, but for whatever reason you cannot import SVGs. You can import Adobe Illustrator files. You can import .ais, which I've done a ton with making the Lottie files for my website. However, .svg files are not currently supported. And so all the things you import are going to show up here in your project. And over here so at the very bottom, this is your sort of your timeline, I guess you would call it. All of your various layers are going to show up on, and again, if any After Effects pros are watching, I apologize for getting the name of these sections wrong, but again, just a beginner. The layers, if you think of them as layers, are going to be, they're going to appear here in this, I don't know, what's the name for that? I can't see the name of this area, just this sort of area right here. All of your layers in your comp are going to show up here. And then over here, this is your timeline, which doesn't look like much right now, but it's going to start to expand the more layers that you add. And then you have the current time indicator, which you can move just by clicking and dragging. And each one of these, wherever you move the time indicator, if you look over here on the left, you'll see what second or minute or possibly even hour that you are at. And so right here, the time indicator is at second 2, and it goes all the way up to second 4, I guess, frame 59. And because this is I set this to be a 5-second animation, as I set up here in the composition settings, I had it set to 5 seconds, and I have it set to 60 frames per second. That means inside of this area right here, which is your timeline, there are 300 individual frames. 60 frames a second, 5 seconds, 5 times 60 is 300. So there's 300 individual frames here. So we're going to get a pretty smooth animation. And so to begin with, and again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive video on how to do all Lottie animations. Sully has a fantastic course available on Lottie files, so feel free to check that out. There's also some stuff on YouTube. It's not quite popular yet, but new videos are being made every day, and I may have one at one point. And so What I want is to create just a square, a yellow square that moves in some form or fashion. And so the first thing we need to do is add a square shape to the composition area here, the canvas, if you're used to Figma. And so if I go up here at the top, I find the rectangle tool, and of course there's a lot of other shape tools hiding under the drop down. Like in Figma, I will select the rectangle tool, and if I click and drag inside of the composition area here, I have my yellow rectangle. And let's see here, go back to my move tool, and which is V like it does in Figma. And so I can click and move my square around if I want to. And we can see here that in our, I just call it the layers panel, I guess. In the layers panel down here, we have a new source, which is shape layer 1, which is the rectangle that I just put down. That's really annoying. Let's do, I still don't understand how that works completely. There we go. And so we have shape layer 1. I can, if you highlight the layer and press enter, you can change the name, so we'll just call that rect. And if we click the arrow here, we can expand it, and we can see properties. And so we have contents and transform. And contents is all of the information, or it's some of the information about the layer, in this case the rectangle that I just added to the comp. And so we have stroke information, fill information, and transform information, and that describes the contents of the shape. And below that we have the transform information, and transform is these are all the tools that we can use to make visual alterations to the shape. In this case, we can change where the anchor point is. We can change the position, move it around the screen, move it around the canvas. We can change the scale, so how large it is in both the X and the Y axes. The rotation, and also we can change the opacity. And as you can see here in the timeline, when you when you collapse transform, it adds a lot more. It adds many. I'm sure there's a name for these. It has. You can see tracks for each one of these transform parameters. And the first thing you want to do, if you want to make this move or do anything, is you'll need to set an initial keyframe. And I would, if you aren't already familiar with keyframes, again, I don't want to discuss it, sort of the basics of animation on this stream. If you want to know more about keyframes, there's some fantastic YouTube videos out there about it. However, my explanation or my definition of keyframe is a keyframe represents either the initial state or the state change, whatever that happens to look like, of an element that's undergoing animation. And the space between the keyframes, the number of frames between each keyframe, is the length of time it's going to take for that animation to take effect. And yeah, the keyframe represents a change or an alteration in the layer or the element. And so what I want to do is I want to make this, let's go ahead and get this a bit more centered. So align, click, click, there we go. And so what I want to do is make this rectangle, I just want to rotate, just a simple rotation. And so we can set however we want it to look like when it starts, and this is fine. I don't want any other rotation than this. And so but because I do intend on rotating it, I need to set the initial keyframe. And to set the initial keyframe, because we're looking at rotation, and I will click the time vary stopwatch, which is this icon right here. And my apologies, I can't really zoom in on what we're looking at here. Oh, you know what? Hold on a second here. I just realized something. Whoop. There we go. You couldn't see what I was talking about. And let's see here. Let me see how that looks. Okay, that looks much better. Sorry about that. Glad I caught that sooner rather than later. And so to go over that briefly, because you couldn't see what I was talking about, with this rectangle layer selected, we have access to the contents, which describe the characteristics of some of the characteristics of the rectangle, so stroke and the fill. And below that, we have access to transform, so we can change the position, scale, rotation, and opacity of this element. And if we, I want to, let's see here, I want to establish that this rectangle can rotate. And so I'm going to click the time vary stopwatch, which, as the tooltip says, toggles the ability of property to change over time. And so I'm going to click that once, and as we can see here, it is turned blue. And let me move this time indicator out of the way. As we can see here, it's a bit dark, so hopefully the contrast isn't too terrible. There is a blue diamond on this in the timing area here. I just forgot the word for it. And we also have an additional set of icons over here that allows us to add or remove keyframes at a certain time. And so what that means is if I move the current time indicator to anywhere, I can add a new keyframe by clicking the arrow icon, and as we can see, there's a new keyframe there, and you can add as many keyframes as you want to. And of course, you can click and drag to select keyframes and delete them. And so I have my initial keyframe right here at the very beginning. And so what I want this to do, and then you need to, in designing your animation, you need to think, how quickly do I want an animation or a transition or whatever the case may be? Excuse me, how quickly do I want this to occur? And then once you know, however you think about that, you need to translate that into frames, or think about it in terms of frames or time, whatever works for you. And so let's say that I want this, this is a 5-second video. Actually, let's see here. Whoop, Command K. I'm going to bump this down to a 3-second video. So I went to composition settings, change the duration from 5 seconds to 3 seconds. Okay, cool. And here we are. Now we have 180 frames to work with instead of 300. And so I want, in 3 seconds, I want this cube to do a full rotation. That's 360 degrees one time. And so I want that to take place over 3 seconds. And so I'm going to drag the time indicator, the current time indicator, all the way over to the 3-second mark, or to the 2-second and 59 frame mark, which is as far right as it can go. It doesn't go all the way to the 3-second mark. It's always 1 frame behind. And I will set another keyframe by clicking the diamond. And of course, whenever you move the current time indicator, it will animate whatever's in the composition will animate wherever you move it to. And as we can see here, nothing's moving because I haven't made a change in the rectangle here. I've just set up 2 keyframes. And so if I go back to, let's see here, if I go back to this keyframe, the keyframe at the very end, what I want to do is show that there's a rotation in place. And so I'm going to select the rotate tool, which is W. And let's see here, I'm going to rotate this thusly. And as I rotate this, keep an eye on this figure down here, the rotation field. As I rotate this rectangle, we can see that it's showing the degrees to which it's rotated. And eventually, if I rotate it more than 360 degrees, it'll say 1 time, or 1 by however many rotations. And this figure right here before the X indicates how many full 360 degree rotations. So this is 2 full rotations plus 115.8 degrees. And so you can, I guess, click and drag with your mouse on the shape to rotate it to where you want it to be. Or if you know what sort of rotation you're looking for, like I know what rotation I'm looking for here, you can just type it in manually. So I want it to, actually let's just do 1 full rotation. Yeah. And so at this keyframe right here, I have it set to 1 full rotation, and at this keyframe right here, if I go back to that keyframe, it's at 0 rotations. So this keyframe, 0 rotations. This keyframe at the very end, 1 full rotation. So what that means is because there's a difference between these 2 keyframes with regard to this 1 parameter rotation, in the all of the frames between those keyframes are going to each one of them is going to show a change in this rectangle. And I've never been good at explaining how keyframes work, and so please excuse my bungled explanation. However, I know that if I click and drag the current time indicator, it shows a rotating square. Indeed. And so, and I'm watching the rotate right here. I'm watching the rotation as it happens, or I'm watching the rotation degree move while I move the current time indicator back and forth. And of course, if you want to play the animation, all you need to do is press space, and it will play it. And as this red line shows, the progress as it's moving through the frames, and it's set to loop automatically. And so this is what it looks like. And so we have a square that essentially looks like it's rotating just on and on forever. And so and we could get significantly more complex than this. Add all sorts of new shapes, change, maybe goof with the opacity, or make it scale in and out, or move it all over the place. And so that'll be dependent on what your design calls for, what sort of animation you need, the context you use the animation in. But in any event, let us say that we are done with our animation and we want to make this into a Lottie file. So what we would do is we would go to Window, go to Extensions, and I I already have the plugin installed called Lottie Files, and I don't remember if body movement is a dependency, or I don't remember if After Effects needs body movement for Lottie Files to exist. Body movement is sort of the forefather of Lottie Files, and body movement is what people used before Lottie Files existed to make Lottie-ish files. In any event, but these plugins are free, and you can find them if you go to your Creative Cloud application and search Creative Cloud. So you can search for, if you search for Lottie, search is temporarily unavailable. All right, hot dog, thanks Adobe. But anyway, that's where you would find that, and then you would install it for After Effects. And so back to After Effects. We have your composition here. Everything's looking good. You've played it a few times. You have your animation the way you want it. You go to Window, Extensions, Lottie Files, and then a new window will pop up here. It's called, it says Lottie Files, and let's see here. Again, I don't want to go through the entirety of how Lottie Files works, but we have shape. That is the name of the composition that I want to export, and so there's some settings here, of course, but again, they're not really germane to this discussion, but I will click the next button, and it did it very quickly there. I'll go back, but when you click forward, it said there, it rendered it too quick. It says rendering, and so it has to take a second and think about it and render out the entirety of the video. This is super simple, and so it didn't take very long to render this at all. And can I make this larger? I can't. Oh, there we go. And so what it does is before you save it, it shows you a preview of what the animation is going to look like, and it has a little player down here, and you can see each one of the frames, and it counts up to, I guess, 179 frames, and you can set a background if that's easier to see it, or whatever the case may be. But as you will see, if I compare it to this After Effects window behind it, in the composition settings, we have the background set to black, and as you can see, it's visible on my screen. Hopefully, this is visible on stream. There is no background. The black background, again, is just to help the designer see what they're doing, and so there is no background here. This is transparent behind it, and so when you're done, you say, yes, that looks good, that's how I want it. You can click Save As, and you have the option of saving it as a .json or a .lottie file. And choose whatever works best for you. But let's say I want to save that as a .json file. Then you have your either Windows Explorer or your OS X Finder for location selection. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it shape.json. And yeah, save to my portfolio. I'll go ahead and save that. And right after you click save, and then depending on how complex your animation is, it might take a few seconds to really just save everything and cram everything into a JSON file. But once you get back to the save as screen and there's nothing crazy going on behind this little modal, then you know that, or behind this little screen, you know that you're good to go. So you can go ahead and close. Whoop. Oh, After Effects. Oh, it's not closing. That's fine. Let's go ahead and, oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. And so we're going to go ahead and go into Finder, and let's see here. It looks like I already have it open. Here is shape.json, which is the file I made, just 1 minute ago. And it has a file size of 1 kilobyte. So you can do for 3 seconds of animation at 60 frames per second. That's 180, 179 frames, 180 frames, and so that's a good amount of animation for 1 kilobyte. And yeah, it is just a rectangle that is the only thing it's doing is rotating. However, that's it's not going to get that much larger provided you don't start adding a bunch of roster images and whatnot. And as you may have noticed, like build.json, which is this image, which is this JSON file right here, it is 622 gigs and kilograms. Sorry, not kilograms, kilobytes. 622 kilobytes. I am working to get that down as far as it can go without sacrificing quality. And it started out as like 1.2 megabytes. And the reason for that is mostly because there's a lot of keyframe information going on in here. And because the more keyframes you add, you're going to increase the file size as well. And there's also just a roster image here. And so I'm doing everything I can to, this is already saved at like lowest JPEG quality in Photoshop, and then I'm doing everything I can to get this file size down. But if this JSON file did, if it had, they're at 60 FPS, if it was at 30 FPS, fewer keyframes, and didn't have a big dumb roster image right there, you would have a much smaller file size. However, you're going to have a small file size no matter what. And from what I've read, you might even be able to get a smaller file size using the .lottie file format. Haven't looked into that, could not attest to that. And so that is how you create a Lottie file. And then, of course, depending on what you do after that's going to depend on where you're going to put it, whether or not it's meant for handoff to developers, in which case you would point them toward the file. If you want to add this to your portfolio, what you would do is then upload the .json or the .lottie file to a directory at your on your web host, or I don't really know how Webflow deals with that, or Squarespace or Wix, but you would upload the file or at least store it somewhere where you could point toward it. And then you would need to include let's see here, Visual Studio Code. Let's see here. You would need to, there we go. You need to include a little bit of the markup to integrate it into the website, into the HTML document, as I've done here. And this is all of, I do have, this could be like 2 or 3, 4 lines of code, 4 lines of markup to get it to display how you want to. And I'm using a NoScript as a backup for users, or a fallback for users who don't have JavaScript enabled. And so 2 lines of code or 2 lines of markup to get it to work as you would like. And so pretty easy to do it. The hard part isn't adding it to the portfolio. The hard part's just making the animation. And of course, if you go in to your animation software and you know what you want it to look like ahead of time, or you may have sketched it out, or whatever the case may be, the difficult part then is just learning the software, keyboard shortcuts, learning where every tool is. And I'm still learning After Effects. Not too terrible. It's certainly no Premiere, but that's what's going to take most of your time, and then you'll get pretty good at that pretty quick. But that's your Lottie file. That's your .json ready for handoff to your devs, and they can once they have the libraries and the dependencies that they need in the app, they can easily deploy that onto an Android or iPhone device, and just as easily with, as you can see here, minimal code, minimal markup to put it on the web. And so that is sort of a crash course in how to create Lottie files. Certainly not how to do animation, but how to generate a .lottie or a .json file. And so I certainly hope you've found that helpful. I am really excited about Lottie files, .lotties. Really cool stuff. I'm not an animation guy, and this is what you're seeing here is pretty much the apex of my animation ability, and still very, very just psyched about the future of animation, in as much as we see it in apps and on the browser, especially for low file size animation. Just really cool stuff. And so hope you enjoyed this stream, and of course if you have any questions, comments, ideas for future streams, you know where to find me on Discord, Slack, and Skype. And you can also check out the YouTube channel. This stream, as soon as I finish the stream, I'll go ahead and download it from Twitch, run it through Media Encoder, and I'll toss it on YouTube. That'll be available sometime soon at 2K res, I believe. And of course, on Twitch, feel free to follow me, subscribe to my channel, and you can sign up for alerts to find out. You'll receive a message whenever I go live. And yeah, if there's any questions, you know how to find me, and I will see you this Friday. Have a good one.